18 months ago, Sylvia Valentina was a titan of the ballet world, her every movement a symphony. Now, she presided over a kingdom of broken things, her own body a shattered instrument. Yet when the music played, something impossible happened. The ghost of a dance, trapped within her, began to stir. The rain knew her secrets. It was a persistent, mournful drumming against the grimy windows of the old Chicago brownstone, the same sound that had echoed on the roof of the ambulance 18 months ago. That night, the slick asphalt and the blinding glare of headlights had rewritten her life's choreography with the brutal finality of a screeching halt. Inside, on the fourth floor, Sylvia Valentina presided over a kingdom of broken things in the amber glow of a single workbench lamp. At 42, the former principal dancer of the Dutch National Ballet was a ghost haunting the architecture of her own life. Her world had shrunk to this room, a space that smelled of dust, wood glue, and old paper, the scent of time slowly decaying. The grand stages of Amsterdam and London were now just faded posters on the wall, mocking her with the image of a younger Sylvia suspended midair in Giselle, impossibly graceful. That woman was a stranger, a creature of light and air from another existence she now avoided looking at directly. Her new stage was a small, cluttered table. Today's patient was a Swiss-made music box from the 1920s. Its tiny, porcelain ballerina, clad in painted blue silk, was frozen mid-pirouette, her mechanism jammed. Sylvia's fingers, which once commanded the vast stages of the world, now moved with a microsurgeon's precision, coaxing a minuscule gear back into place. She could grant this tiny effigy the grace she herself had been denied, a perfect, endless spin in a world of 2 square inches. A vinyl record of Swan Lake turned softly on a player in the corner, the music a ghost in the room. As the familiar swell of the strings for Odette's variation began, a flicker of sensation sparked below her left knee. Then it ignited. A treacherous memory of muscle and sinew, the phantom burn of a perfectly executed arabesque penché in a limb that wasn't there. She gripped the edge of the workbench, her knuckles white, her breath a ragged hitch in her throat. The pain was an illusion, but the memory was real, a cruel, beautiful torment. It subsided, leaving a hollow ache and the suffocating silence of her apartment. The walls, with their peeling paint, seemed to lean inward. Human contact was a transaction, buffered by wood and distance. Groceries were left outside her door after an anonymous online order. She was a curator of broken beauty, mending their perfection as a penance for her own. But the music always stopped, and Sylvia, in the silence that followed, was left with only the rain and the ghost of a leg that still, treacherously, remembered how to dance. Downstairs, on the third floor, Daniel was chasing ghosts of a different kind. At 17, he viewed the world through the second-hand lens of a Sony A6000, a camera that felt more like an extension of his own eye than a piece of equipment. He was a collector of overlooked moments. The way the late afternoon sun turned the dust in a laundromat into a swirling galaxy, the intricate web of cracks on an old sidewalk, the weary kindness in the face of the man who ran the corner store. For his application to a prestigious youth film festival, he was working on a short documentary titled Silent Stories. The theme was an obsession of his, the idea that the most profound narratives were the ones left unspoken. That night, the same rain that confined Sylvia was, for Daniel, an invitation. He wanted to capture the rhythm of the water dripping from the rusted fire escape in the building's gloomy back courtyard. He set up his tripod on the damp concrete, shielding his camera with a plastic bag, his breath misting in the cool air. He was adjusting his focus, trying to catch the brief, star-like glint of a drop as it hit a metal railing, when a light flicked on 2 floors above him. A warm, golden rectangle appeared in the dark brick facade, ruining his shot. He sighed in frustration, but then he saw movement, a silhouette. It wasn't the clumsy, everyday movement of someone getting a drink or closing the curtains. It was different, deliberate. A record player, its sound faint and warped by the distance and the rain, began to play Tchaikovsky. Daniel froze, his hand hovering over his camera. He knew the music. His mother played classical radio on weekends. It was Swan Lake. He slowly, carefully, tilted his camera upward and zoomed in. The silhouette belonged to a woman. He couldn't see her face, only her form against the light, and she was dancing. Or not dancing in the way he understood it. She was seated, but her arms, they carved the air. Her shoulders articulated a story of profound longing. Her head tilted back in a gesture of such exquisite, silent grief that Daniel felt a knot tighten in his own chest. It was a language spoken by hands, wrists, and the delicate curve of a spine. It was a performance for an audience of one, in a room he couldn't see, a story of flight and imprisonment told by a body that never once rose to its feet. Awe sharp and sudden pierced through him. He felt like a voyeur, a spy trespassing on a moment of intense privacy, but it was more than that. He felt like a witness. This was a silent story, the most powerful one he had ever seen. His finger found the record button. He came back the next night and the night after that. He never stayed long, just a few minutes, a quiet observer in the shadows below. He collected these fragments of light and movement like a secret, a hand fluttering like a trapped bird, a torso arching in a memory of a lift, a face, turned briefly to the window, etched with an emotion too vast for the small, illuminated square. He didn't know who she was or why she danced this way. He only knew that he was watching a soul speak, and he had to find a way to listen. The silhouette in the window became Daniel's obsession. It fueled his project and his curiosity in equal measure. During the day, he'd edit the short, haunting clips he'd captured, the woman's movements flowing into one another on his laptop screen, a ballet of shadows. Who was she? He started with the mailboxes in the building's drab lobby. 4 billion, S. Valentina. The name was elegant, musical. A quick search online for Valentina Dancer Chicago yielded nothing recent. He broadened the search, adding keywords like ballet and Europe. That's when he found it. A grainy, digitized article from a Dutch newspaper, dated 3 years prior. The headline, poorly translated by his browser, read, "Star of National Ballet, Sylvia Valentina, in tragic accident." The article was accompanied by a photo of a woman mid-leap, her face radiant with fierce joy. It was the woman from the poster he'd glimpsed once when her door was ajar. He fell down a rabbit hole of old reviews and performance archives. He read about her legendary Giselle, her fiery Kitri in Don Quixote. He watched blurry YouTube videos of her on stage, a whirlwind of strength and grace. The Sylvia Valentina of the past was a titan. The woman in the window was her echo. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a chilling article about the car crash. It mentioned the severity of her injuries, the end of her career, and her subsequent retreat from public life. He felt a pang of guilt for his nightly filming, but it was quickly overshadowed by a deeper sense of purpose. He wasn't seeing a tragedy. He was seeing the art that had survived it. He was seeing the part of her that the accident couldn't take. His resolve was solidified by a stark, white envelope slipped under his own apartment door. A notice from a property management company. The building had been sold. All tenants were to vacate the premises within 90 days. The news hit him with a jolt of anxiety, but his first thought was of the woman upstairs. For him, it was an inconvenience. For her, it might be a catastrophe, another tearing away of the world she had so carefully constructed. For 3 days, Daniel rehearsed what he would say. He paced his room, his laptop clutched in his hands like a shield. Finally, heart hammering against his ribs, he walked up the flight of stairs to 4 billion. The air outside her door was still and quiet. He raised his hand and knocked, the sound unnervingly loud. The door opened a crack held by a chain. An eye, wary and tired, peered out at him. "Yes," her voice was raspy, unused. "Hi, I'm Daniel. I live downstairs in 3 billion. He fumbled with his words. "I'm sorry to bother you." She said nothing, her gaze unwavering. He took a breath. "I'm a filmmaker, a student, and I've seen you." He saw a flicker of fear in her eye and hurried on. Not in a weird way, I mean from the courtyard. Your window. He decided to risk it all. He opened his laptop, angled it towards the crack in the door, and played a short, edited sequence. Her hands tracing the air, the arch of her back, the tilt of her head, all set to the silent, rhythmic pulse of his edit. He looked up from the screen, his own expression earnest and pleading. I don't know who you are, he lied, wanting the compliment to be pure. But this is the most beautiful story I've ever seen. It's not about what's missing. It's about what's still there. He had expected the door to slam shut. Instead, after a long, tense silence, he heard the metallic slide of the chain being undone. The door swung inward. The room was exactly as he'd imagined. Dim, crowded with tools and the husks of music boxes. Sylvia stood before him, leaning slightly on a simple wooden cane. Her face, etched with fatigue, was still structured with the fine bones of the woman in the photographs, but her eyes held a storm of conflicting emotions. Suspicion, shock, and a deeply buried flicker of something else. Something he couldn't name. "Come in," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel stepped inside, feeling as if he'd crossed the threshold into a sacred, fragile space. The air was thick with the scent of oil and old vinyl. He closed his laptop, suddenly shy. For the first few minutes, the silence was a tangible thing between them. He didn't dare bring up the eviction notice. It was Sylvia who broke it. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone flat, defensive. "I want to tell your story," Daniel said, his voice gaining a sliver of confidence. "My film is called Silent Stories. It's about the art people don't see. The way you move, it's a language. I want to film it, properly." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Film what? A cripple in a chair. The world has seen enough of that tragedy porn." "No," Daniel insisted, shaking his head with a force that surprised them both. "Not a tragedy, an art form. I don't care about your leg. I care about your hands, your shoulders, the story in your eyes. I want to film the dancer, not the accident." His words hung in the air, audacious and utterly devoid of pity. It was this, more than anything, that disarmed her. For 18 months, everyone who had breached her solitude had looked at her with a soft focused sympathy, their eyes always drifting down to the space where her leg used to be. They saw a loss. This boy, with his oversized hoodie and intense gaze, saw a presence. She was still hesitant. The thought of a camera's unblinking eye on her brokenness was terrifying. But the eviction notice sat on her workbench, a stark reminder that her carefully constructed world was about to shatter anyway. Maybe this was a different kind of breaking. A breaking open. "One day," she said, her voice wavering. "We try for one day. If I hate it, you leave and delete everything." "Deal," Daniel said instantly, a grin spreading across his face. Their first session was excruciatingly awkward. Sylvia sat stiffly in her chair, hyper-aware of the lens, her movements stilted and self-conscious. Daniel, sensing her discomfort, changed his approach. He put the camera down. "Forget the film," he said. "Tell me about the music box." He pointed to the ballerina she'd been fixing. "Tell me her story." Slowly, hesitantly, Sylvia began to talk. She spoke of the character, the intention behind a pose, the emotion a simple turn of the head was meant to convey. As she spoke, her hands began to move, unconsciously demonstrating. A flutter of fingers to signify fear. A slow, deliberate extension of the arm to show longing. Daniel quietly picked up his camera and began to film, focusing only on her hands. He guided her, not with directions but with questions. "What did it feel like the moment before the leap?" he'd ask. And she would close her eyes, her torso arching, her breath catching, her body remembering. He was mining for the gold of her muscle memory. He wasn't just her director, he was her archaeologist, her confidant. In that small, dusty room, through the quiet hum of the camera, a profound collaboration was born. It wasn't a dancer and a filmmaker. It was two artists, speaking the same language, pulling a soul back into the light. The film came together in fragments, a mosaic of light and shadow. Daniel named it Sylvia's Hands. It was spare and unflinching, built without a single word of narration or explanation. He let the images speak for themselves. The film opened with an extreme close-up. Sylvia's fingers, impossibly delicate, guiding a tiny metal pin into the heart of a music box mechanism. The shot held, showing the minute, controlled strength in her knuckles, the artist's focus etched into her skin. He intercut these scenes of meticulous repair with the haunting, silhouetted footage from the window, the raw emotion of her private dances. The juxtaposition was powerful. One set of movements was about mending an object, the other was about expressing a soul. Both were acts of profound creation, of holding onto beauty in a world of broken things. The centerpiece of the film, its heart-stopping climax, was the final sequence. Daniel had cleared a space in her living room, pushing the workbench aside and draping a black cloth over the far wall. He set up a single, soft light, creating a space that felt less like an apartment and more like a minimalist stage. He put on a high-fidelity recording of Saint-Saëns, The Dying Swan. Sylvia sat in her simple wooden chair, facing the camera. For a long moment she just breathed, her eyes closed, gathering the ghosts of performances past. Then the first cello note sounded and she began. What followed was breathtaking. She performed the entire piece with her upper body. Her arms became wings, not just mimicking but embodying the frantic, delicate flutter of a creature fighting its fate. Her back rippled with a current of remembered strength and impending collapse. Her hands spoke a language of their own, trembling, reaching, curling into fists of defiance before softening into acceptance. Her neck, long and elegant, conveyed the swan's final, heartbreaking surrender. It was all there, the struggle, the beauty, the rage, and the release. The camera never moved. It simply bore witness to this condensed, potent storm of artistry. The final shot held on her face as the last note faded. A single tear traced a path through the faint dust on her cheek. But her expression wasn't one of sadness. It was one of absolute, cathartic release, of power. The night of the Youth Film Festival, the theater was packed. When Sylvia's hands began, a hush fell over the audience. They watched, captivated. There were no gasps of pity, only a deepening, collective intake of breath. When the screen went black for a full 3 seconds, there was absolute silence. It was a silence of awe, of processing. Then the applause started. It wasn't polite clapping. It was a roar, an explosion of emotion that seemed to shake the very foundations of the old theater. In the middle of the crowd, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a striking silver bob watched the credits roll, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. This was Amelia Vance, the artistic director of Kinesis Project, Chicago's most innovative contemporary dance company. A former dancer herself, her own career had been cut short by a spinal injury. She hadn't just watched a film. She had recognized a language she thought she was the only one left speaking. She saw not a story of loss, but a story of evolution. And she knew, with a certainty that thrilled her, that she had just found her next collaborator. After the awards were handed out, Daniel's film won both the Grand Jury Prize and the Audience Award. A determined Amelia Vance navigated the crowded lobby. She bypassed the cluster of people congratulating a beaming, bewildered Daniel and went straight to Sylvia, who was standing awkwardly by the wall, looking overwhelmed by the noise and the well-meaning glances. "Sylvia Valentina," Amelia said, her voice warm but direct. There was no preamble, no fawning praise for the film. She met Sylvia's gaze with an intensity that was startlingly familiar. It was the look of a director, a choreographer, one artist assessing another. "Your dance vocabulary hasn't disappeared," she stated, as if it were an undeniable fact. "It has condensed. It's evolved. The story your arms and torso told in that chair was more profound than what I've seen from 100 able-bodied dancers this year." Sylvia was speechless. The words were not praise. They were a professional diagnosis, a technical observation from an equal. They were the highest form of respect she had received in years. Amelia continued, her eyes alight with an idea. "My company, Kinesis Project, we don't work with bodies. We work with movement. We explore the architecture of human expression." She leaned in slightly. "I don't want to give you a tribute. I want to give you a commission. I want to create a new piece with you, for you. A solo performed seated. We'll call it the unfinished dance. The noise of the lobby faded away. The unfinished dance. The title itself was a key, unlocking a door Sylvia had long ago bricked over in her own mind. It wasn't about what was over, it was about what was still to come. This wasn't an offer of charity. It was a challenge. It was a stage. It was a future she hadn't dared to even dream of. She looked over at Daniel, who had approached and heard the offer, his eyes wide with a joy that was entirely for her. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent echo of the support he had given her all along. The eviction notice, the dusty apartment, the lonely nights, they all seemed to belong to another lifetime. A lifetime that had ended when this boy knocked on her door. Tears welled in Sylvia's eyes, but for the first time in a long time they were not tears of grief. They were tears of overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful hope. She looked back at Amelia Vance, the woman who saw not a relic but a resource. "Yes," Sylvia said, her voice clear and steady. "I would like that very much." 6 months later, the house lights of the Kinesis Project Theater dimmed to a deep, expectant hush. A single, stark spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating a simple wooden chair at the center of the stage. This was the premiere of the unfinished dance. Sylvia sat in that chair, not as a woman confined but as a queen upon her throne. The music, a commissioned piece of minimalist cello and electronic soundscapes, began to breathe through the speakers. And she danced. Every movement was a revelation. Every extension of her arms painted a universe in the air. Every subtle shift of her torso was a line of poetry. She was a storm and a whisper, a memory and a prophecy. The dance told a story not of loss, but of transformation, of a body relearning its own power, of a spirit finding a new, more potent language. It was mesmerizing, powerful, and utterly whole. In the front row, Daniel watched through the viewfinder of his camera, his own tears blurring the image. The lens was focused on Sylvia's face. The shadows of grief were gone, burned away by the heat of the stage lights and the fire of her own artistry. In their place was only the pure, transcendent light of a dancer, home at last.